When I was 17, I found proof my father had another daughter. My mother told me she was dead. She was. She was alive, and my parents erased her from our lives like she never existed. This is the story of how I found my sister and learned my entire family was built on a lie. I never thought I'd be sitting here telling you this story, but after everything that happened, after all the lies finally unraveled, I realized I had to get this out. Because the truth was so much worse than anything I could have imagined. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how I discovered my entire life was built on a lie. A lie so deep, so carefully constructed, that when it finally came crashing down, it didn't just destroy my family. It destroyed everything I thought I knew about who I was. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, or at least what I thought was the beginning. I grew up in what everyone called the perfect family. We lived in a beautiful house in the suburbs, the kind with a white picket fence and a golden retriever named Biscuit. My mom, Patricia, was a pediatrician. My dad, Richard, was a successful lawyer. And then there was me, the only child, doted on, privileged, living what most people would consider a dream life. Every Sunday, we had family dinners. Mom would cook her famous pot roast, and we'd sit around the table, talking about our weeks. Dad would tell stories about his cases, the ones he could share anyway, and Mom would talk about the kids she'd helped at the hospital. I'd share whatever teenage drama was happening at school, and they'd listen with genuine interest. Or at least, I thought it was genuine. Looking back now, I can see the cracks, the moments that didn't quite add up. But when you're living in it, when you trust the people around you with every fiber of your being, you don't question things. You don't see what's right in front of you. The first real crack appeared when I was 17. It was small, insignificant even, but it was the thread that, when pulled, would eventually unravel everything. It was a Saturday afternoon in October. I remember because the leaves were just starting to turn, and I was home alone, procrastinating on my college applications. I was looking for my birth certificate, needed it for one of the forms, and Mom had told me it was in the filing cabinet in Dad's study. Dad's study was his sanctuary. He didn't like us going in there, said it was where he kept sensitive client information. But Mom had given me permission, so I went in. The filing cabinet was locked. Of course it was. I searched his desk for the key, getting more frustrated by the minute. That's when I found it, hidden in a false bottom of his desk drawer. Not just the key to the filing cabinet, but a small metal box also locked. Now, here's where I should tell you I respected his privacy and just took the filing cabinet key and left. But I was 17, curious, and honestly a little annoyed that everything in his study was locked up like Fort Knox. So I tried the same key on the box. It opened. Inside were photographs, old ones from before I was born, pictures of my dad when he was younger, maybe mid-20s. He was standing with a woman I'd never seen before. She had dark hair, olive skin, and in one photo, she was clearly pregnant. I felt my stomach drop. Who was this woman? Why did my dad have these photos hidden away? But here's the thing that really got me. There was a photo of a baby. A little girl, maybe a year old, with the same dark curly hair as the woman. And on the back of the photo, in my dad's handwriting, it said, Melissa, 14 months old. Melissa, not Sarah, Melissa. I stood there, my hands shaking, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. Did my dad have another daughter? Had he been married before? Why had no one ever mentioned this? I heard the garage door open. They were home. In a panic, I shoved everything back into the box, locked it, and put it back where I found it. I grabbed the filing cabinet key, found my birth certificate, and got out of there as fast as I could. For the next week, I couldn't stop thinking about those photos. I looked at my dad differently, studied his face for signs of what I didn't even know. Guilt, secrets. I didn't know what I was looking for. I considered asking him directly, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the way the photos had been hidden. Maybe it was the fact that in 17 years, he'd never once mentioned having another child. Whatever it was, I decided to investigate on my own first. I started with Google. I searched every combination of Richard Morrison and Melissa I could think of. Nothing relevant came up. I tried searching for the woman in the photos, but without a name, it was impossible. Then I remembered something. My dad kept old documents in the attic. Tax returns, old bills, things like that. If he'd been married before, there might be something up there. One afternoon, when both my parents were at work, I went digging. It took me 3 hours, but I found something. Buried in a box labeled 1995 to 1999, I found a divorce decree. Richard Morrison and Alina Morrison divorced in 1999, 2 years before I was born. Alina, the woman in the photos, must have been Alina. But here's what made my blood run cold. In the divorce settlement, there was a custody agreement. For Melissa Alina Morrison, born March 3, 1997. My dad had a daughter. She would be, I did the math, 24 years old now. I had a sister no one had ever told me about. I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. That night at dinner, after Dad had gone upstairs to take a work call, I turned to my mom. I told her I needed to ask her something. She looked up from her plate, smiling, and asked what was on my mind. I asked if Dad had another daughter before me. The change in her expression was instant. The smile vanished. Her face went pale, then flushed red. She set down her fork carefully, too carefully, like she was trying to control her movements. She asked me where I heard that. Her voice was tight. I told her I found photos and divorce papers in the attic. I asked her who Melissa was. She closed her eyes, and for a long moment she didn't say anything. When she opened them again, there were tears there. She told me it was complicated. I asked her to uncomplicate it, please. She stood up, walked to the kitchen door, and closed it. When she came back, she sat down next to me instead of across from me. She confirmed that yes, my father was married before her, to a woman named Alina. They had a daughter together, Melissa. I asked why no one ever told me. I said I had a sister. She corrected me. She said I had a sister, past tense. The room started spinning. I asked what she meant. Mom took my hands in hers. Her hands were shaking. She told me that Melissa died when she was 3 years old. It was a car accident. Alina was driving and she couldn't finish the sentence. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. She told me that my father was destroyed, absolutely destroyed. The divorce happened right after. Alina blamed herself, my father blamed Alina, everything just fell apart. He couldn't talk about it. For years, he couldn't even say her name. I was crying. I asked if that's when he met her, my mom. She nodded and said about a year after the divorce. He was still broken. She helped him heal. And when they decided to have me, they both agreed that it would be better to start fresh, to not burden me with that tragedy, to let me grow up happy without the shadow of that loss hanging over me. It made sense. It was sad, tragic even, but it made sense. I hugged my mom, and we both cried for the sister I never knew I'd lost. But here's the thing about lies. Sometimes they're so perfect, so carefully crafted that you believe them completely. You don't see the inconsistencies. You don't notice the gaps. And I didn't, not then. I tried to let it go. I really did. My parents had their reasons for not telling me. It was painful, it was their past, and I could respect that. But over the next few months, something changed. Maybe it was knowing about Melissa, or maybe I was just finally paying attention, but I started noticing things. Like how Mom and Dad never talked about their early years together. How there were no photos in our house from before I was 5 years old. How whenever I asked about their wedding, they'd give vague answers and change the subject. I also started noticing Mom's behavior. She'd get these phone calls and step out of the room. She'd close her laptop whenever I walked by. And sometimes, late at night, I'd hear her crying in their bedroom. I told myself it was grief. The conversation about Melissa had brought up old pain, but deep down, something felt off. Then came my 18th birthday. My birthday party was supposed to be perfect. My parents had rented out a room at a nice restaurant, invited all my friends and some family members. My Aunt Carol was there, Dad's sister, along with her husband and kids. Some of Mom's cousins came too. Everything was going great. We'd had dinner, cut the cake, and I was opening presents when Aunt Carol pulled me aside. She told me she needed to talk to me about something. We stepped out onto the restaurant's patio. It was May, warm and beautiful, but I felt a chill run through me at the serious look on her face. She said she'd been debating whether to tell me this for months now. Ever since my father told her I found out about Melissa. I told her it was okay. I understood why they didn't tell me. It was traumatic for everyone. She looked at me strangely and asked what exactly they told me. I explained about the accident, about how Melissa died when she was 3. Aunt Carol's face went white. She asked if Mom told me Melissa was dead. The world tilted. I asked if she wasn't. Aunt Carol said no. Melissa was alive. She was 24 years old and living in Portland with her mother. I couldn't breathe. The patio, Aunt Carol, everything started spinning. I said it was impossible. Mom said. Aunt Carol interrupted and told me she didn't know what my mother said, but Melissa was very much alive. She saw her just last Christmas. Alina sends her photos every year. My legs gave out. I sat down hard on one of the patio chairs. I asked why they would lie about that. Why would they tell me she was dead? Aunt Carol knelt down in front of me. She told me she thought there was a lot about my parents' past that I didn't know, and she thought I needed to talk to Alina and to Melissa. I asked if she had their contact information. She pulled out her phone and told me she was going to give me Alina's number, but she warned me that I needed to be prepared. What I was about to learn would change everything. I didn't call right away. I went back inside, got through the rest of my party in a daze, and pretended everything was fine. But that night, lying in bed, I stared at Alina's number on my phone for hours. Finally, at 2 a.m, I called. She answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice was groggy, confused. I said hi and asked if this was Alina Morrison. There was a pause. She confirmed it was and asked who was calling. I told her my name was Sarah. Sarah Morrison. I was Richard Morrison's daughter. The silence on the other end was deafening. I could hear her breathing, short and sharp. She finally said my name. Oh my God, Sarah. I told her I just found out about her. About Melissa. I was told she was dead, but my Aunt Carol said. Alina interrupted, her voice filled with fury and something else. Fear, maybe. She asked if I was told Melissa was dead. She said that woman, that goddamn woman. I begged her to please tell me the truth. What happened? Why didn't I know my sister? She told me it was because my father didn't want me to know. Because Patricia didn't want me to know. She asked if we could meet. This wasn't a conversation we should have over the phone. We made plans to meet that weekend at a coffee shop halfway between our cities. I told my parents I was spending the weekend with a friend. They didn't question it. I should have known then that they were hiding something. Normal parents would have questioned a sudden weekend trip, but they just smiled and said to have fun. I spotted Alina as soon as I walked into the coffee shop. She looked just like she did in the photos, older now but still beautiful. And sitting next to her was a young woman with dark curly hair and my father's eyes. Melissa. My sister. I walked over to their table on shaking legs. Alina stood up and, to my surprise, hugged me. She told me to look at me, that I was beautiful. I looked so much like Richard. Melissa stayed seated, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Wariness, maybe, or hurt. We all sat down, and for a moment no one spoke. Finally, Alina broke the silence and asked what they told me about why they weren't in my life. I repeated the story Mom had told me. The car accident, Melissa's death, the divorce. By the time I finished, both Alina and Melissa were crying. Alina told me none of that was true. Melissa didn't die. There was no car accident. My father and she divorced because he had an affair with Patricia. The coffee shop felt too small, too hot. I asked what she meant. Alina explained that my mother was a nurse at the hospital where she gave birth to Melissa. She and my father started an affair when Melissa was about 6 months old. It went on for almost 3 years before Alina found out. I shook my head. I said no, my mom would never. Alina continued, saying my mother was obsessed with my father. When she found out and demanded a divorce, Patricia was ecstatic. She thought she'd finally have him all to herself, but there was a problem. I whispered that the problem was Melissa. Melissa spoke for the first time, confirming it was her. Her voice was hard. She said Patricia couldn't stand that she existed, that she was proof of Dad's life before her. So she gave him an ultimatum, choose her or choose me. I felt sick. I said he chose her, Patricia. Alina's tears were falling freely now. She told me he gave up all parental rights, signed them away like she was nothing, like their daughter was nothing. Patricia made sure of it. She wanted a clean slate, a new family with no reminders of the past. I asked why lie about it, why tell me she was dead. Melissa answered bitterly that it was because that was easier than explaining that my father abandoned his first daughter for his mistress. Easier than admitting what kind of people they really are. I wanted to defend them. These were my parents, the people who raised me, loved me, gave me everything. But sitting across from my sister, my living, breathing sister who'd been erased from my life, I couldn't find the words. Alina pulled out a folder from her bag. She said she brought these for me. She thought I should see them. Inside were documents, court papers, emails, letters. One email in particular stood out. It was from my dad to Alina, dated 3 months before I was born. It read, "Alina, I'm asking you one last time to reconsider the custody arrangement. Patricia and I are starting fresh with this baby, and having Melissa visit will only confuse everyone. It's better for everyone, including Melissa, if we make a clean break. I'll continue child support payments, but I think it's best if I step back from active parenting. Patricia agrees this is healthiest for all involved." I read it 3 times, hoping the words would change. They didn't. There were others, too. Letters from Patricia to Alina, cold and threatening. One said, "Richard has moved on. We're building a new family now, and we don't need constant reminders of his past mistakes. If you care about Melissa at all, you'll let Richard go and stop trying to force a relationship that no one wants." Past mistakes. She was talking about my sister, about a child. I looked up at Melissa and asked if she wanted a relationship with him, with Dad. Her jaw clenched. She told me she was 3 years old when he left. She didn't understand why her daddy stopped coming to see her. She used to wait by the window every Saturday, thinking maybe this would be the weekend he'd show up. Her mom would tell her he was busy, that he still loved her, but eventually she stopped waiting, stopped believing, and she learned to hate him instead. I told her I was so sorry, knowing how inadequate those words were. She said it wasn't my fault, but her eyes told a different story. She resented me. Of course she did. I was the daughter he chose to keep, the one he stayed for. Alina spoke quietly, telling me she tried. Every year on Melissa's birthday, she sent a card to our house. For Melissa. From her, telling her that her dad was thinking of her, that he loved her even if he couldn't be there. She thought maybe it would help her feel less abandoned. My blood ran cold. I asked about birthday cards. She confirmed. Every single year from when Melissa was 4 until she turned 18. She asked if Richard gave them to her. I thought about all those years, all those birthdays. I'd never seen any cards for Melissa. I said no, he never gave her any cards. Alina's face crumpled. She said of course he didn't, because that would have meant admitting she existed, admitting he had another daughter. Melissa stood up abruptly. She said she needed some air. She walked outside, and I watched her through the window, her shoulders shaking. Alina told me Melissa was angrier than she let on. Finding out my father had another daughter, one he actually chose to raise, that he actually wanted, it reopened a lot of old wounds. I said desperately that I didn't know. I swore I had no idea. She told me she knew. This wasn't my fault. But I needed to understand that Patricia and Richard built their entire life together on erasing Melissa, on pretending she never existed. And they did it so thoroughly that even me, their own daughter, didn't know I had a sister. I drove home that night in a fugue state. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about my parents, about myself, it was all a lie. I walked into the house at midnight to find both my parents waiting up for me in the living room. Mom asked how my weekend with Amy was, smiling. I looked at her, really looked at her. How had I never seen it before? The fakeness in her smile, the calculation in her eyes. I told her I didn't spend the weekend with Amy. I spent it with Alina and Melissa. The color drained from both their faces. Dad started to speak, but I held up my hand. I told them not to. Don't you dare. For 18 years, they lied to me. They made me believe my sister was dead. They erased her from my life, from our family, like she never existed. Mom stood up and started to say, I didn't understand the full situation. I shouted, asking them to explain it to me then. Explain how they could do that to a child. His child. I pointed at Dad and told him he abandoned his daughter. His 3-year-old daughter. For her. For Patricia. Dad's voice was shaking when he spoke. He said it wasn't that simple. I asked him to make it simple then. Did he give up custody of Melissa? He couldn't look at me. That was answer enough. I turned to Mom. I asked if she gave him an ultimatum, her or Melissa. Mom's face was red. She said I was twisting everything. She was trying to protect our family. I told her Melissa was family. She was my sister. Mom's mask finally slipped. She said Melissa was Richard's past. I was his future. They made a choice to move forward, not backward. I felt something break inside me. I asked how she could say that. How could she talk about a child that way? Dad finally spoke up. He said they thought they were doing the right thing, starting fresh, giving me a stable, happy childhood without the complications. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. I told them complications. They meant without his other daughter, without the inconvenient reminder that he was a cheater and she was a homewrecker. Mom slapped me. We all froze. In 18 years, my mother had never laid a hand on me. She told me not to dare speak to her that way. She raised me. She loved me. She gave me everything. I touched my cheek, feeling it burn. I told her she gave me everything except the truth. I went upstairs, packed a bag, and left. I didn't tell them where I was going. I didn't care if they worried. I checked into a hotel and spent the night crying, calling Alina. She talked to me for hours, filling in the gaps, telling me stories about Melissa as a little girl, about how she used to ask about her daddy, about how she'd draw pictures for him that he'd never see. The next morning, I called Melissa. She answered cautiously. I asked if we could meet, just the two of us. We met at a park, sat on a bench. For a while, neither of us spoke. Finally, I broke the silence. I told her I was sorry, for everything, for existing, for being the daughter he chose, for not knowing about her. She was quiet for a long time. Then she told me it wasn't my fault. She'd spent years being angry at me, at the idea of me, but I didn't ask to be born into this mess any more than she asked to be abandoned. I asked what she wanted, from me, from this situation. She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. She said she didn't know. Part of her wanted nothing to do with me. I was a reminder of everything she lost, but another part of her always wanted a sister. I told her I always wanted a sister too. I just didn't know I had one. We sat there for hours talking. She told me about her life, about how she grew up knowing her father didn't want her, about how she saw a therapist for years trying to work through the abandonment, about how she'd built a good life despite it all. She was a teacher now, 2nd grade. She loved it. I told her about my life, about the perfect family that turned out to be built on lies, about how I didn't know who I was anymore if everything I thought I knew was false. She understood that better than anyone. Over the next few weeks, Melissa and I started building a relationship. It was awkward at first. We were strangers connected by DNA and a shared trauma. But slowly, we found common ground. We had the same sense of humor. We both loved reading. We were both terrible at sports. And we both had to figure out what to do about our parents. I wasn't speaking to Mom and Dad. They'd tried calling, texting, even showing up at my friend's house where I was staying. I ignored them all. But I couldn't ignore them forever. I was still in high school, still dependent on them financially. And part of me, despite everything, still loved them. They'd been good parents to me, just not to Melissa. Melissa told me she got it. She said I didn't have to cut them off for her sake. What they did to her was between them and her. But I needed to decide for myself if I could forgive them. Could I forgive them? That was the question I wrestled with for months. I started therapy. My therapist helped me work through the betrayal, the anger, the confusion. She asked me what I wanted. I wanted my sister. That was clear. Melissa and I were building something real, something good. I wasn't going to lose her. But did I want my parents? I finally agreed to meet with them. 3 months after I'd left, we met at a neutral location, a park near our house. They looked terrible. Mom had lost weight. Dad had aged years in months. Mom started crying as soon as she saw me. She told me she was sorry, so sorry. I asked what she was sorry for specifically. She said everything, the lies, the deception, keeping me from Melissa. I asked if she was sorry for the affair, for making Dad choose between his daughters. She hesitated, and in that hesitation, I had my answer. She said it was complicated. She loved my father. She couldn't share him with his past. I told her Melissa wasn't his past. She was a child, his child, and she made him abandon her. Dad spoke up then. He said no one made him do anything. He made his own choices, and he'd have to live with them. I asked if he regretted it. He said every day, every single day, but he couldn't take it back. I asked why he never reached out. Melissa was an adult now. He could have contacted her any time in the last 6 years. He said he was afraid she'd hate him, afraid she'd reject him like he rejected her. I told him she did hate him, and she had every right to. We sat in silence for a while. Finally, I told them I couldn't forgive them. Not yet, maybe not ever. What they did was unforgivable. They erased a child. They lied to me for 18 years. They built their entire relationship on a betrayal. But I also told them I wasn't ready to cut them out of my life completely. They were still my parents. That didn't erase what they did, but it was the truth. Mom asked if I was going to keep seeing Melissa. I told her yes, absolutely yes. Melissa was my sister. She was in my life now, and she was staying in my life. Mom looked like I'd stabbed her. I told her she needed to accept it. She made this mess. She didn't get to dictate how I cleaned it up. Dad asked if there was any way, any possibility that he could meet Melissa, talk to her, apologize. I told him that was up to Melissa. Not me, not him, not Mom. Melissa got to decide if she ever wanted to see him again. Over the next year, things slowly, painfully, started to find a new normal. I graduated high school. Both my parents and Melissa came to my graduation. They didn't sit together. They didn't speak. But they were both there for me. I started college. Melissa helped me move into my dorm. She gave me advice about professors and classes. She became the big sister I never knew I needed. Mom and Dad tried to repair our relationship. It was hard. There was so much hurt, so much broken trust, but they were trying. Mom started therapy. Dad started writing letters to Melissa, even though she never responded. And then, 2 years after I first learned the truth, Melissa called me. She said she was ready to talk to Dad. I asked if she was sure. She told me no, she wasn't sure. She didn't know if she could ever forgive him, but she needed to hear it from him. Why he left. Why he chose his new family over her. She needed closure. I helped arrange the meeting, just Melissa and Dad, at a coffee shop, the same one where I'd first met Alina and Melissa. I didn't go. This was their conversation to have. Melissa told me later that it was brutal. Dad cried. She didn't. He apologized. She listened. He told her he was weak, that he made the worst mistake of his life, that he thought about her every day. She told him that thinking about her wasn't enough. She needed a father, and he wasn't there. He chose not to be there. He said he knew, and he was sorry. She told him sorry wasn't enough, but it was a start. They didn't hug, they didn't make promises of future relationships, but they talked, really talked, for the first time in 21 years. Afterward, Melissa called me. She was crying. She said it didn't fix anything. She still had years of therapy ahead of her. She still resented him, but she felt lighter somehow. Like a weight she'd been carrying for decades had finally shifted. That was 3 years ago. Today, Melissa and I talk almost every day. She's my best friend, my sister, my person. We celebrate holidays together. She's dating someone now, a great guy who treats her like gold. She's talked about me meeting him. My relationship with my parents is complicated. I love them, but I don't trust them the way I used to. Maybe I never will. Mom and I are civil. We have lunch once a month. We don't talk about Melissa unless I bring her up, which I do deliberately, reminding Mom that Melissa exists, that she matters. Dad has been trying harder. He sends Melissa birthday cards now, Christmas cards. She doesn't always respond, but she keeps them. I've seen them in her apartment. Last month, Melissa invited Dad to her birthday dinner. He came. They still don't have what you'd call a relationship, but they're talking, slowly building something from the ashes of what was destroyed. Alina has been incredible through all of this. She welcomed me into their lives without hesitation. She never made me feel like I was the enemy, even though I represented everything she lost. She's the kind of person I aspire to be. Sometimes I think about what my life would have been like if I'd never found those photos. If I'd never learned the truth. Would I have been happier? Maybe. Ignorance is bliss, right? But I also wouldn't have Melissa. I wouldn't have my sister. And she's worth every moment of pain this truth brought. The thing is, lies have a way of coming out. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. And when they do, they don't just hurt the people they were told to. They hurt everyone. They poison everything they touch. My parents thought they were protecting me by hiding Melissa, by pretending she didn't exist. But all they did was rob me of 21 years with my sister. All they did was teach me that love is conditional, that people are disposable, that families can be erased if they're inconvenient. I'm still working through all of it, still in therapy, still figuring out who I am now that I know the truth. But here's what I've learned. Family isn't just about blood. It's not just about who raised you, it's about who shows up, who tells you the truth, who loves you even when it's hard. Alina showed up for me when she didn't have to. Melissa let me into her life when she had every reason to slam the door in my face. My parents, the people who were supposed to protect me, lied to me every day for 18 years. I'm building my family now, the one I choose, and Melissa is at the center of it. So if you're watching this and you're keeping secrets, thinking you're protecting someone, think about this. The truth always comes out. Always. And when it does, the betrayal isn't just in what you did. It's in the years of lies that came after. Tell the truth, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Because the people you love deserve that. They deserve to know who they are, where they come from, who their family is. I deserve to know I had a sister. Melissa deserved to have a father. Alina deserved honesty and respect. And my parents deserved, I don't know, to be held accountable for what they did. This isn't a neat ending. There's no moment where everything is suddenly okay. Real life doesn't work that way. We're all still figuring it out, still healing, still learning how to be a family after everything that happened. But we're trying, and maybe that's enough for now. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. Thank you for hearing my story. I hope you never have to go through something like this. But if you do, I hope you find your truth. I hope you find your people. And I hope you never let anyone convince you that you're not worth the truth. Because you are, we all are.